Hi there. My name is Savannah Bennett, but for most of my life, I felt like I barely existed. I had a twin sister, Scarlett, the golden child, the perfect daughter. She had everything handed to her: the attention, the admiration, the love. And me? I was nothing more than a shadow in my own family. I should have known better than to expect anything different on graduation night. The house was filled with laughter, with toasts made in Scarlett's honor. And then, my mother stood up, raised her glass, and made an announcement. A dream trip to Florida, a perfect graduation gift. For Scarlett. No one even looked at me. No one asked what my plans were. I was invisible. Again. But it wasn't just the trip. It was the lie. The long-standing deception that kept me in the dark my whole life. The whispered words I wasn't meant to hear. Savannah? She was never part of the plan. That night, something inside me changed. I realized I had spent 18 years waiting for a family that would never truly see me. But now I was done waiting. Because if I wasn't part of their plan, then maybe it was time to make one of my own. The grand hall of the Bennett estate buzzed with laughter, clinking glasses, and the murmured conversations of Charleston's elite. Chandeliers bathed the marble floors in a golden glow, and the air was thick with the scent of champagne and expensive perfume. Tonight was a celebration, one that, as usual, had nothing to do with me. I stood at the edge of the room, my fingers tightening around the stem of a champagne flute. Across the hall, Scarlett shined like the centerpiece of the evening, her perfectly curled blonde hair cascading over the delicate straps of her designer gown. She wore the adoration of the crowd like a second skin, basking in every compliment, every glance of admiration. "Scarlett, darling, you must be so proud." A woman in pearls gushed, her voice dripping with southern charm. Scarlett laughed, effortless and radiant. "Oh, I am. It's been a whirlwind, but I couldn't have done it without Mom and Dad." I nearly scoffed at the statement. Will Bennett wasn't my father, but it was easier for Scarlett to pretend he was. It kept the illusion intact, the one where she was the golden daughter of a perfect Southern family. And I was, well, something else. "Of course," Elizabeth chimed in, placing a possessive hand on Scarlett's shoulder. "We always knew our daughter was destined for great things." Our daughter, singular. The words settled in my chest like a weight, familiar but still suffocating. A waiter passed by, and I set my untouched champagne down before anyone could notice my fingers trembling. No one looked my way anyway. A burst of laughter erupted from the center of the room, drawing my attention back to Scarlett. I caught a glimpse of her, standing beside Will as he raised his glass. The entire room fell silent. "To my daughter, Scarlett!" His voice carried easily, rich and authoritative. "She's made us so incredibly proud, and what better way to celebrate her accomplishments than with a well-deserved trip?" A murmur of excitement rippled through the guests. I stiffened. Elizabeth's smile was calculated as she took over. "Next week, we'll be flying to Florida for a luxurious getaway, a reward for all of Scarlett's hard work." The room erupted into polite applause. Scarlett clapped her hands together in delight, eyes wide with excitement. I blinked. Florida. A trip I hadn't heard a single word about. I forced a breath through my nose, keeping my expression carefully blank. Was I supposed to pretend this wasn't a slap in the face? That it wasn't deliberate? "You must be so excited, Savannah," a woman beside me said with a pleasant smile. I turned toward her, confusion flickering for a brief second before realization set in. She thought I was Scarlett. The embarrassment came quick, burning at my skin. But before I could correct her, Elizabeth's voice carried across the room. "Savannah will be staying here. She's more comfortable at home." The dismissal was so casual, so effortless, as if my absence was expected. The woman beside me let out a small, "Oh," clearly unsure how to respond. I swallowed against the bitterness rising in my throat. Scarlett turned toward me, the light catching in her perfectly glossed lips as she tilted her head. You don't mind, right, Savvy? Savvy, a nickname that felt like a leash, keeping me bound to a role I never chose. I smiled, the kind that didn't reach my eyes. Why would I? Scarlett grinned, as if that was the answer she'd been expecting. The night dragged on. I played my part, standing at the fringes, exchanging empty pleasantries, nodding at conversations that had nothing to do with me. At some point, I found myself outside, my hands pressed against the cool iron railing of the second-floor balcony. The party continued behind me, muffled through the walls. The night air smelled of magnolia and salt from the nearby marshes. I closed my eyes and inhaled deeply, trying to anchor myself. She was never part of the plan. My breath stilled. Elizabeth's voice, barely audible through the crack of the open window behind me. You worry too much. Will's voice followed, dismissive. We did everything right, Elizabeth said, firmer this time. Scarlett is the future of this family. Savannah, she was never part of the plan. Something inside me fractured. I stepped away from the balcony railing, the words repeating in my mind like an echo I couldn't silence. Never part of the plan. I turned, glancing back through the window. Elizabeth was standing near the grand piano, swirling the champagne in her glass. Her posture was relaxed, her expression unreadable. She hadn't meant for me to hear. But I had. And I would never forget it. The next morning, I walked downstairs, my body heavy with exhaustion. I hadn't slept much. The weight of last night still sat in my chest like a stone, pressing down with every breath. The house was quiet, too quiet, except for the faint clinking of china coming from the dining room. The scent of freshly brewed tea mixed with the lingering aroma of expensive candles that never seemed to burn out. Elizabeth sat at the head of the long mahogany table, her posture straight, her expression composed. She didn't even look up when she spoke. Savannah, we need to talk. I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled out a chair, the scrape of wood against marble the only sound between us. I already knew whatever she was about to say would be nothing I wanted to hear. She finally glanced up, a small, polite smile playing at the edges of her mouth, the kind she reserved for guests, strangers, people she had no emotional investment in. I assume you heard about Scarlett's Florida trip. I clenched my jaw, refusing to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. She lifted her teacup, taking a slow sip before setting it back down. You'll stay here and take care of the house while we're away. That was it. No explanation, no offer, no question of whether I had plans of my own. I stared at her, my pulse pounding in my ears. Why do you treat me like I don't exist? It was the first time I'd ever said it out loud. The words sat between us, sharp and dangerous. Elizabeth sighed, the kind of sigh that people gave when they were forced to explain something tedious. She folded her napkin neatly on her lap before meeting my gaze. Because, Savannah, she said simply, life isn't fair. And you, my dear, were never meant to be the star. The words struck like a slap, but I refused to let her see it. Her gaze lingered on me for a moment before she stood, smoothing out the fabric of her perfectly pressed blouse. Brunch starts at 11. Do try to look presentable. She left me sitting there, alone with nothing but the quiet hum of the house and the unshakable truth. I would never matter to her. The restaurant was one of the most exclusive in Charleston, a place where socialites gathered to sip mimosas and discuss matters that were as polished as the silverware they used. The kind of place where appearances were everything. I sat at the far end of the table, watching as the conversation revolved around Scarlett, as if the entire world spun in her orbit. Will raised his glass, his voice booming over the soft murmur of background jazz. To Scarlett, he announced. You've made us proud, sweetheart. A well-deserved celebration for an even more well-deserving daughter. There it was again. Scarlett beamed, her smile practiced, effortless. A woman across the table leaned forward, her perfectly manicured fingers wrapped around a champagne flute. And what about Savannah? She asked, her tone polite. oblivious to the tension that immediately followed. What are her plans? The table fell into a brief, uncomfortable silence. Then Elizabeth laughed lightly, dabbing at the corner of her mouth with her napkin. "Oh, Savannah," she mused, her voice carrying the same amusement one might have when discussing a child's foolish antics. "She's staying back. Someone has to look after the estate, after all." Laughter rippled through the table, soft and dismissive, as if my existence was nothing more than an afterthought. My fingers curled around my napkin, tightening until my knuckles ached. I could feel it, this slow, simmering heat beneath my skin, building with every second that passed. Scarlett glanced at me from across the table, her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to say something. But she didn't. She never did. I pushed my chair back, the sound scraping against the floor, loud enough to cut through the noise. The laughter died. Every eye turned to me. I looked at Elizabeth, at Will, at Scarlett. They expected me to stay silent. Again. Instead, I lifted my chin, my voice unwavering. "Enjoy your trip, Scarlett." I paused, letting my words settle, then added, "Just remember, you're not the only Bennett in this family, whether you like it or not." A hush fell over the table, thick and suffocating. Scarlett's expression was frozen in place, shock flickering behind her carefully maintained composure. Elizabeth's lips pressed together, but there was something else in her gaze. Not anger, not surprise, but calculation. I turned on my heel and walked out of the restaurant, stepping into the warmth of the afternoon air. For the first time in my life, I refused to be invisible. That evening, I sat at my desk, the only light in my room coming from the soft glow of my laptop screen. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitating before I finally typed in the name that had been rattling around in my head all day. Jonathan Carter. I hit enter. The search results loaded, and my heart pounded as I scanned the page. Most of it was dull. Business records, a few outdated financial articles, nothing unusual. But then, my eyes caught a headline buried beneath the clutter of irrelevant links. Scandal rocks business mogul. Jonathan Carter. Abrupt fall from grace. 18 years ago. 18 years ago. The exact time I was born. A chill crept down my spine. I clicked the article, my pulse quickening as the page loaded. The article was old, the formatting outdated, but the words felt sharp, like they had been waiting for me all these years. Jonathan Carter had once been a rising star in the corporate world, a man with a reputation for turning struggling businesses into empires. Then, without warning, he had vanished. The article didn't say much, only that his departure was sudden, shrouded in secrecy. A family scandal had been mentioned but never fully disclosed. There were no details, no explanations, just rumors that swirled before fading into obscurity. I scrolled further, and then I saw it. A photograph, grainy and faded with time, but unmistakable. Jonathan Carter, young, charismatic, smiling, and standing right beside him, her manicured hand resting lightly on his forearm. Elizabeth Bennett. My breath caught. I stared at the image, my mind scrambling to make sense of what I was seeing. There was no doubt. My mother had known Jonathan Carter, and judging by the way they were standing together, she hadn't just known him, she had been close to him. I swallowed, a bitter taste coating my tongue. Elizabeth had spent my entire life dismissing my questions about our family's past. She controlled everything, down to the smallest details, as if rewriting history to fit whatever narrative she wanted. But now I had proof that there was more to the story. I saved the article, my hands shaking slightly as I took a screenshot of the image. My mother had gone to great lengths to keep Jonathan Carter out of our lives. And if my gut was right, it wasn't just because he had once been an associate of hers. I exhaled, my mind racing. I needed answers. And there was only one person I could turn to. I opened my messaging app and attached the image to a text. Charlotte Whitmore, my grandmother, the only person in this family who had ever looked at me like I was more than an afterthought. I hesitated for only a second before pressing send, A few minutes later, my phone vibrated. One message. We need to talk. Tomorrow morning. My house. Alone. I stared at the screen, my pulse hammering in my ears. I didn't know what she was going to tell me, but whatever it was about to change everything. The next morning, I parked outside Charlotte's house, my fingers gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached. The modest white cottage, covered in climbing ivy, stood in stark contrast to the Bennett estate. There were no iron gates, no pristine hedges trimmed to perfection, just a welcoming front porch with a rocking chair swaying slightly in the breeze. I exhaled, steadying myself. It was time for answers. I stepped out of the car, gravel crunching beneath my feet as I walked up the front steps. The door creaked open before I could knock. Charlotte stood there, her sharp blue eyes softening as she took me in. She didn't smile. She didn't ask me why I was here. She already knew. "Come inside, sweetheart," she said gently, stepping aside. "There's something I should have told you a long time ago." The warmth of her home wrapped around me like a blanket, the scent of cinnamon and fresh coffee filling the air. Sunlight streamed through lace curtains, casting soft patterns across the wooden floor. It felt safe here, something the Bennett mansion never had. She led me to the kitchen, where 2 steaming mugs of tea sat waiting. I took a seat at the small table, my hands resting on my lap, my heart hammering against my ribs. Charlotte sat across from me, wrapping her fingers around her cup as if drawing strength from the warmth. I didn't bother with pleasantries. I pulled out my phone, slid it across the table, and watched her expression as she took in the image on the screen. Jonathan Carter. She inhaled sharply, but didn't look surprised. Just sad. "I need to know the truth," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, with a heavy sigh, she reached for the old wooden box sitting on the counter. She pulled it onto her lap and unlatched it, her fingers trembling slightly as she rifled through its contents. Finally, she pulled out a worn leather photo album, its edges frayed with time. She flipped it open, revealing a faded picture of a young Elizabeth, her hair pulled back, her lips curved in a soft, unguarded smile, and her stomach rounded in the unmistakable curve of pregnancy. My breath caught. Charlotte traced the photo with a delicate touch, her eyes clouded with memories. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. "Jonathan Carter, he's your real father!" The words slammed into me like a physical blow. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to ground myself, but the room felt unsteady, like the very foundation of my life had been ripped from beneath me. Elizabeth had lied. Not just about a trip, not just about family history. She had erased an entire man from my existence. She told me Will Bennett was my father, I said, barely recognizing my own voice. Charlotte's expression tightened. "That's because she made it that way." I shook my head. I don't understand. She was with Jonathan. I gestured toward the photo. "They were together. Why would she?" Charlotte sighed, rubbing her temple. "Because the Whitmores didn't approve." She turned the page in the album, revealing another photograph. This one of a young Jonathan, grinning, his arm wrapped tightly around Elizabeth. There was love in his expression, the kind that didn't fade easily. "He wasn't high class enough," she continued. "Jonathan was brilliant, ambitious, but he didn't come from old money. Your grandfather thought he was a risk. And in our world, Savannah, risks aren't tolerated." I pressed my lips together, bile rising in my throat. "So what?" I asked. "They forced her to leave him? To marry Will?" Charlotte hesitated. "Not exactly," she said finally. She flipped to another page, another picture of Elizabeth, but this time she wasn't glowing. Her smile was strained, her body stiff. Beside her, Will Bennett stood, his arm wrapped around her possessively. "Elizabeth didn't want to marry Will," Charlotte admitted. "She loved Jonathan, but when she found out she was pregnant, well, your grandfather gave her 2 options. She could have the baby and give up the Whitmore name, lose her inheritance, her status, everything. Or she could marry Will, pretend the baby never existed, and live the life they planned for her. A sickening realization settled in my stomach, and she chose Will. Charlotte's gaze met mine, filled with an emotion I couldn't place. "Not at first," she said softly. She told Jonathan about the baby. They planned to leave, to run away together. But then, something happened. She told him she lost the baby. The words hung in the air like poison. I swallowed, my throat burning. "She lied to him?" Charlotte nodded. "She married Will a few months later. By the time you were born, Jonathan had disappeared from the corporate world. She made sure he had no reason to come looking." I clenched my fists. "He never even knew I existed?" Charlotte shook her head, regret thick in her voice. "No, honey. Your mother made sure of that." I inhaled sharply, but the air felt heavy, too thick to swallow. My entire life, I had felt like an outsider. Now I knew why. I wasn't supposed to exist. Elizabeth had built an empire on lies, manipulating every piece of her world until it fit the pristine image she wanted. And in doing so, she had buried the truth of who I was. But secrets don't stay buried forever. I turned my gaze to the photograph of Jonathan Carter, my real father. His eyes, my eyes, stared back at me, and something inside me shifted. It wasn't just sadness. It was rage. I need to find him. Charlotte hesitated, but when she spoke, there was no argument in her tone. "I thought you might say that," she murmured. I pushed back from the table, my heart pounding, my mind already racing with what came next. For 18 years, Elizabeth controlled my life, but that ended now. Later that night, I sat in my car, staring at the small, unassuming house in front of me. The porch light flickered, casting a dim glow over the cracked sidewalk and neatly trimmed hedges. A wind chime swayed gently in the night breeze, the soft, clinking sound oddly soothing against the storm raging inside my chest. I gripped the steering wheel, my pulse hammering in my ears. The name on the mailbox was clear, unmistakable. Jonathan Carter. For 18 years, I had no father. Only lies, only silence. And now, I was seconds away from facing the man I never knew existed. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for the DNA test results tucked inside my bag. I had memorized every line, every statistic that proved I wasn't just some lost girl searching for answers. I had a right to be here. I took a deep breath, exhaled sharply, and pushed the car door open. My boots crunched against the pavement as I made my way toward the front porch. With each step, doubt whispered in my ear. What if he didn't believe me? What if he had a new family now? What if he didn't want me? I shook the thoughts away and climbed the porch steps. My fingers curled into a fist, hovering over the wooden door. This was it. I knocked. For a moment, nothing. Just the chirping of crickets and the hum of a distant car passing by. Then, the porch light flickered again, and I heard the slow creak of the floorboards behind the door. It opened. A tall man stood there, his frame lean but strong, dressed in a plain button-down and jeans. His dark hair was streaked with gray at the temples, his face lined with age, but his sharp blue eyes, my blue eyes, locked onto me with a quiet intensity. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice deep but cautious. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. His gaze flickered over my face, studying me, searching for something. I forced my lips to move. I'm your daughter." Silence. His hand gripped the doorframe, knuckles whitening, jaw tightening. "That's not possible." His voice was hoarse, but something, doubt, recognition, fear, flashed in his eyes before he shut it down. I didn't hesitate. I pulled the DNA test from my bag and held it up between us. "It is," I said firmly. Jonathan's breath hitched. His fingers twitched at his side, like he wanted to reach for the paper, but couldn't bring himself to do it. His face twisted in something raw, something broken. Then he whispered it. "Elizabeth, She told me she lost the baby. The words felt like a knife to my chest. I had always assumed I was ignored, forgotten. But I wasn't just abandoned. I was erased. Jonathan ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply, pacing back a step. His body language screamed disbelief, but his face told another story. She lied to me, he muttered, almost to himself. I watched as realization set in, as the years of deception unraveled in his mind. His eyes flicked to mine again, this time lingering longer, as if seeing me, really seeing me, for the first time. I swallowed the lump in my throat and asked the question that had been burning inside me since the moment I learned the truth. Did you love her? Jonathan blinked, startled. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, finally, he nodded. I did. His voice was quiet, almost regretful. More than anything, the weight of his words settled between us, and for the first time in my life, I saw something in a parent's eyes that I had never seen before. Grief, guilt, hope. Jonathan's fingers curled against the doorframe, his shoulders rising and falling as he took a steadying breath. Then, finally, he spoke. Come in. Jonathan set a glass of water on the table, his hands trembling as he slowly sat across from me. His eyes, still sharp despite the lines of age, stayed fixed on the DNA results lying between us. He traced his own name on the paper, his fingers hovering over the proof of my existence as if he were trying to absorb the truth through touch alone. For a long moment, he said nothing, just breathed, just stared. Then, finally, he exhaled, his voice raw. Tell me everything Elizabeth did. I didn't hesitate. I started from the beginning. The years of being invisible in my own home, the constant comparison to Scarlett, the way Elizabeth had made it clear, in 100 small and cruel ways, that I was nothing more than an inconvenience. I told him about the Florida trip, about standing in a crowded room while my family toasted to Scarlett's future as if I wasn't even there. I told him about the night I overheard Elizabeth say that I was never part of the plan, how my entire existence had been an afterthought, a mistake she had no intention of letting the world acknowledge. Jonathan listened, silent but intense. His grip tightened on the armrests of his chair, his knuckles turning white as my words poured out. I could see the emotions battling inside him, rage, guilt, grief. When I finally finished, the silence between us felt suffocating. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his fingers threading through his graying hair. His breathing was uneven, ragged. I should have fought harder for her, he muttered. I should have known she was lying. I shook my head. My own hands were curled into fists in my lap, but my voice was steady. You didn't know. You couldn't have known. He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. But I should have suspected. The Whitmores never wanted me near her. I wasn't enough for them. No connections, no wealth, no power. He swallowed hard, his voice thick with regret. I told myself she loved me enough to choose me anyway, that we could build a life together, no matter what her family thought. And then, just like that, she was gone. She told me she lost the baby, that she needed time to heal. And I believed her. His voice cracked on the last words, and something inside me twisted painfully. I had spent my entire life feeling abandoned, unwanted. But looking at Jonathan now, I saw something I never expected. He had been abandoned too. I wasn't the only one Elizabeth had erased. Jonathan inhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his face. I lost 18 years of your life, Savannah, and that's on me, too. His words settled heavily between us. I wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault, that I wasn't even sure what to do with this new reality. But the pain in his eyes mirrored something in my own, and maybe, for the first time, I didn't have to carry it alone. I looked around his home, small, modest, but warm. Shelves lined with books, a few framed photos of places, people, but none of me. It wasn't his fault, I reminded myself, but it still hurt. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, letting out a slow, measured breath. Then he looked at me, really looked at me, his expression shifting into something new, something firm. "Savannah, do you want to fight for what's yours?" I blinked. "What?" His jaw tightened. "Elizabeth took everything from me, and now she's trying to take everything from you. Are you ready to fight back?" His words sent a shiver down my spine. Fight back. For years, I had let things happen to me. I had stood in the shadows while Scarlett basked in the light. I had let Elizabeth dictate my worth, had let her decide where I fit in her carefully curated world. But Jonathan was right. I had a right to exist. I had a right to claim my place. I met his gaze and for the first time felt something new burning in my chest. Determination. "Yes," I said, my voice unwavering. "I am." Jonathan nodded, pushing himself up from the chair. He reached for his coat, slipping it over his shoulders with quiet resolve. "Then let's begin." In the dim glow of her office, Elizabeth leaned back in her leather chair, one hand wrapped around a delicate crystal glass of wine, the other holding the phone to her ear. The air in the Bennett estate was still, almost too still, as though the house itself was waiting for the next move. On the other end of the call, Robert Hale, longtime family lawyer, fixer, and confidant, sighed deeply. He had been expecting this. "Savannah knows," Elizabeth said, her voice deceptively calm. She went to Jonathan. Hale's pause was long enough to confirm he understood the weight of those words. "Then it's time we remind her why she doesn't belong in this family," he murmured. Elizabeth smirked and took a slow sip of her wine, the rich taste spreading over her tongue. "Exactly." She ended the call, setting the glass down on the polished mahogany desk. The world she had carefully built over the years was starting to shift, and she wasn't about to let Savannah unravel it. What was hidden should remain hidden. The door to the office was cracked open. Scarlett stood just outside, frozen in place, her heart hammering in her chest. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but when she heard her sister's name, she stopped. Something in Elizabeth's tone sending an unexpected chill through her. She had spent her life trusting her mother, believing every carefully placed word. But now there was doubt. Scarlett pushed the door open further, stepping inside. Elizabeth turned, raising a perfectly arched brow. "Something you need, darling." Scarlett hesitated. Then, before she could stop herself, she asked, "Why are you so afraid of Savannah finding out the truth?" Elizabeth chuckled, setting her wineglass down with a soft clink. "Oh, sweetheart, you don't understand, do you?" Scarlett stiffened. "Then explain it to me." Elizabeth stood slowly, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she approached her daughter. She reached up, gently tucking a loose strand of Scarlett's hair behind her ear, her touch cool and deliberate. "There is only room for one heir in this family," Elizabeth whispered. "And it's you." Scarlett felt something shift in her stomach, a queasy sensation curling at the edges of her thoughts. She had always taken her mother's word as truth, had always believed that Savannah's distance was her own fault. But now she wasn't so sure. Across town, I sat in Jonathan's small home, my hands curled around a cup of tea that had long gone cold. The weight of the past few days pressed against my shoulders, but for the first time, I wasn't carrying it alone. Jonathan leaned forward, his elbows resting on the coffee table, his expression thoughtful. "I need you to meet someone," he said. "Who?" "Elliot Grayson. He's my lawyer, and if we're going to challenge Elizabeth, we'll need him on our side." I hesitated. "Challenge her? How?" Jonathan's eyes darkened. "She's spent years controlling everything. I want to take that control away." I exhaled, nodding. "She's been underestimating me my whole life. I think it's time I remind her who I am." Jonathan studied me for a moment, before a slow, proud smile crossed his lips. "That's my girl." Later that night, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I picked it up, my stomach twisting when I saw the name on the screen. Scarlett. I hesitated before opening the message. "Meet me. I need to talk to you." Alone. I stared at the screen, my gut warning me this wasn't just some friendly conversation. Scarlett had never reached out before. Not like this. Something was coming, and I had a feeling I wasn't going to like it. I pulled up to the cafe, my fingers tightening around the steering wheel as I scanned the nearly empty parking lot. The place was quiet, tucked between high-end boutiques and dimly lit restaurants in downtown Charleston. The golden glow from inside seeped through the windows, creating a deceptive sense of warmth. Scarlett sat in a corner booth, her back straight, hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. She didn't look up right away. I exhaled and stepped out of the car, my boots clicking against the pavement as I made my way inside. A soft jazz tune played overhead, the kind of background noise meant to put people at ease, but nothing about this meeting felt easy. I slid into the booth across from her, resting my arms on the table. Scarlett finally met my gaze. "You're making a mistake," she said. I huffed a quiet laugh. "Nice to see you too, Scarlett." She didn't smile. Her perfectly polished nails tapped against the ceramic mug, the only outward sign of her discomfort. "You don't know what you're getting into," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I tilted my head. "And what exactly am I getting into?" Scarlett sighed, leaning forward. "Mom doesn't lose, Savvy. Ever. If you push her, she'll make sure you regret it." I crossed my arms, my irritation simmering beneath the surface. "What's she going to do? Erase me again?" Her expression flickered, just for a second. That was all it took. "She can do worse," she admitted. A chill settled over me. I had known Elizabeth was ruthless, but the way Scarlett said it, there was something deeper there, something she wasn't saying out loud. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, studying her closely. Scarlett hesitated, her grip tightening around the coffee cup. "Because," she exhaled, "because I don't want you to get hurt." It was the first time I had ever seen doubt in her. For years, she had blindly followed Elizabeth, basking in the attention, the privileges. But now, there was uncertainty. "Scarlett," I said, softer now. "You don't have to protect her. If you know something, if you know how she's planning to come after me." "I don't know anything for sure." She shook her head, her gaze darting away. "But I know Mom, and I know how far she'll go when she feels threatened." Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. Scarlett had never reached out to me before, never warned me, never cared enough to. But now, for the first time, I saw it. She was afraid. Not just for me, for herself. Still, I knew she wasn't ready to betray Elizabeth. Not yet. "You still want to believe she's the good guy," I said, watching her carefully. Scarlett swallowed but didn't argue. She pushed back from the table, grabbing her purse. "Just be careful, Savvy." And with that, she walked out, her figure disappearing into the night. I sat there for a moment, my mind racing. Then my phone buzzed. I glanced down at the screen. Unknown sender. Frowning, I opened the email. There was no message, no subject line, just an attachment. I tapped it, and a document loaded onto my screen. I skimmed the first few lines, and then my breath hitched. Bank transactions, offshore accounts, shady deals. It was a financial trail leading straight back to Elizabeth Bennet. I scrolled further, my heart pounding. Whoever had sent this, they had given me the weapon I needed to fight back. But the question was, who? Back at the Bennet estate, Elizabeth stood in her study, scrolling through her phone, the dim glow of the screen illuminating her sharp features. The glass of wine in her free hand remained untouched. Her gaze locked onto the message staring back at her. She has the documents. A slow, cold smile spread across her lips. "You thought I wouldn't find out?" she murmured. "Cute." She placed her wine glass down with precision, her fingers tapping rhythmically against the mahogany desk. The walls of the Bennet estate had ears, and she had spent a lifetime ensuring that no one moved against her without consequence. this wouldn't be any different. I sat at my kitchen table, the only light coming from my laptop screen, my hands motionless over the keyboard. The document was still open, rows upon rows of numbers, transactions, dates, evidence. Everything I had suspected about Elizabeth, her corruption, her greed, the lengths she had gone to protect her pristine reputation, was laid out in black and white. It was overwhelming. But what sent a fresh wave of unease through me was the email accompanying it. Elizabeth Bennet is not untouchable. Use this wisely. No name, no sender information, nothing that gave me any hint as to who had sent it. But they were right. Elizabeth was untouchable, until now. I exhaled and clicked forward the email to Jonathan and Elliot. 5 minutes later, my phone vibrated. I answered on the first ring. "This is enough," Jonathan said, his voice urgent. "This is more than enough to bring her down." "She won't let this happen quietly," Elliot added. His voice was smooth, practiced, the voice of a man who had spent years in courtrooms. "She will retaliate." I already knew that. "She's underestimated me my whole life," I said. "She thinks I'll back down. She thinks I'm weak." Jonathan's voice was firm. "Then let's show her she's wrong." I clicked off the call, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was it. This was the first real move. Elizabeth exhaled slowly, staring at the fire flickering in the grand fireplace of her office. She hated being put in a position of defense. It was a foreign, unnatural concept to her. She had built an empire of control, carefully curated every part of her life, her family, her legacy, and Savannah was threatening to undo it all. She tapped her nails against the armrest of her chair before picking up her phone again. The call rang twice before a voice answered. "She has the documents." The voice on the other end remained silent for a moment before exhaling. "And what would you like me to do about it?" Elizabeth's lips curled upward. "You know what needs to be done." A knock at my door sent a sharp jolt through my chest. I glanced at the clock. Nearly midnight. The unease curled in my stomach before I even stood. My apartment wasn't the kind of place where people dropped by unannounced. Not at this hour. A second knock, louder this time. I stepped forward, cautiously peering through the peephole. 2 men in dark suits stood on the other side, their expressions blank, professional. I hesitated for half a second before unlocking the door. "Savannah Bennet?" one of them asked. I nodded, my pulse quickening. The man in front held out a thick envelope. "You've been served." I took the envelope slowly, my fingers tightening around the edges as I flipped it over. Elizabeth's name was listed at the top of the legal document inside. Of course. I felt the air leave my lungs as the weight of the moment settled over me. Elizabeth just made her first move, and I wasn't backing down. In her law office, Elizabeth smirked as she poured herself a glass of wine, swirling the dark liquid in the glass before taking a slow sip. "Let's see how well she plays under pressure," she murmured. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped against the thick stack of legal papers sitting on her desk, the lawsuit she had just set into motion. Savannah thought she was clever, thought she could challenge the very foundation Elizabeth had built. But she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. I sat stiffly in Elliot Grayson's law office, staring at the lawsuit in my hands. The words blurred together, my vision tunneling on the bolded accusations. Defamation. False allegations. Irreparable damage to reputation. My stomach churned. Elizabeth wasn't just trying to scare me. She was going for blood. Jonathan paced behind me, his fury practically radiating off of him. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, rubbing his temples before stopping to face Elliot. "How solid is this?" Elliot sighed, adjusting his glasses as he leaned back in his chair. "She's claiming that Savannah has deliberately spread false information to ruin both her personal reputation and Bennet Industries." He tapped the edge of the paper. "She's demanding financial damages and a public retraction." I scoffed, tossing the papers onto the desk. "She's trying to silence me." Jonathan's voice was dangerously low. "She won't get away with this." Elliot studied me carefully, steepling his fingers together. "Elizabeth knows what she's doing. This isn't just about the lawsuit, it's about perception. She wants to force you into a corner before you can go public with what you found." I clenched my jaw. "Of course she did. And she's betting I'll back down," I said, keeping my voice steady. Elliot nodded. "Most people would." I met his gaze. "She doesn't know me as well as she thinks." Jonathan finally stopped pacing and took a seat beside me, his expression dark. "We go public." I turned to look at him, blinking in surprise. Elliot raised an eyebrow. "You mean release the documents?" Jonathan nodded, his jaw tight. "She hit first, but we control the next move. If we leak the financial documents before she can twist the lawsuit to her advantage, we take away her power. The media will turn on her before she can spin the narrative." It was a bold strategy, one that could completely change the course of this war. I hesitated, glancing down at my phone. The last text Scarlett had sent me sat at the top of my messages. "Be careful, Savvy. If I did this, if I went through with it, there would be no turning back." I inhaled sharply. "Let's do it." That night, I sat in my car outside a dimly lit news office, my fingers tightening around the flash drive resting in my palm. I was about to change the game. Steeling myself, I stepped out of the car and walked into the building. The journalist I had contacted, a woman named Lydia Cruz, was waiting in the empty office, her eyes sharp with curiosity as I approached. "Do you have what I need?" she asked. I handed her the drive. "This will expose everything." She studied me, her expression unreadable. "Once I publish this, there's no undoing it." I held her gaze. "That's the point." As I turned to leave, I whispered under my breath, "Let's see how she likes being the one under the microscope." At the Bennett estate, Elizabeth's phone vibrated against the polished surface of her desk. She picked it up lazily, glancing at the screen, until her eyes narrowed. Exclusive. Fraud allegations rock Bennett Industries. CEO under investigation. Her grip on the phone tightened, her knuckles turning white. She slammed the glass of wine down onto her desk, the liquid splashing over the rim. Her pulse pounded in her ears as her gaze darkened. "You little brat," she hissed. Savannah had just started a war, and Elizabeth never lost. My phone rang before the sun had fully risen, the harsh vibration cutting through the silence of my apartment. I groaned, rubbing my face as I reached for it. "Scarlett." I exhaled before answering. "Scarlett! What the hell did you just do?" she hissed. I sat up instantly, the weight of her words slamming into me. "You just blew up our mother's entire life." I ran a hand through my hair, inhaling slowly to keep my voice level. "No, Scarlett, she did this to herself." There was a beat of silence on the other end, a hesitation I never expected. For once, Scarlett wasn't immediately defending Elizabeth. I swung my legs off the bed, gripping the phone tighter. "She's been lying, manipulating, controlling everything for years. This isn't just about me, and you know it." Scarlett exhaled sharply. "You don't understand what you've started." I frowned. "I know exactly what I started." My laptop chimed with notifications. I grabbed it and flipped open the screen, my breath catching at the flood of emails and news alerts. Breaking: fraud scandal explodes at Bennett Industries. CEO Elizabeth Bennett under investigation. My stomach twisted. This wasn't just making headlines, it was everywhere. I barely had a second to process it before another call came in. "Jonathan." I clicked over. "Did you see?" "We forced her hand, Savannah," he said, voice clipped, "but she's not done yet." I swallowed hard, my pulse kicking up. Be ready for what comes next. At the Bennett estate, Elizabeth's grip on her phone tightened, her nails digging into the screen as she stared at the news coverage. She had prepared for many things, but not this. The world was watching. Her empire, her carefully constructed image, was unraveling. Her breath came sharp as she slammed the phone onto her desk, turning to Robert Hale, the family's longtime lawyer and fixer. "I don't care what it takes," she snapped. "Shut this down." Hale, ever calm, nodded. "I'll make some calls." Elizabeth exhaled, steadying herself. Then she scrolled through her contacts, her finger hovering over a familiar name. Scarlett. She pressed call. "Get to the house." Now Scarlett arrived at the estate an hour later, stepping inside cautiously. Elizabeth stood by the fireplace, the glow of the flames flickering against her sharp features. For the first time in her life, Scarlett saw something in her mother's eyes she had never noticed before: desperation. Elizabeth turned, her expression cold and unreadable. "I need you to choose." Scarlett frowned. "Choose what?" Elizabeth stepped forward, her voice sharp, unwavering. "You're either with me or against me." Scarlett's chest tightened. This was her mother, the woman who had given her everything, the woman who had built her future. But there was something else beneath the carefully constructed mask. Fear. Scarlett took a slow breath, her heart pounding. "I need time to think." Elizabeth's expression darkened instantly. "You don't have time, Scarlett." Scarlett turned on her heel, walking toward the door, her mind spinning. She wasn't sure where she stood anymore. Elliot's office was quiet, save for the ticking of a clock on the wall. The weight of the past few days sat heavy on my shoulders as I leaned forward, hands clasped together. Jonathan sat beside me, his posture stiff, his gaze locked onto Elliot. Then Elliot slid a thick envelope across the desk toward me. "We have another problem," he said, his tone grave. I hesitated before reaching for it, my fingers grazing the paper as I flipped it open. The first thing I saw was the official court seal. My stomach tightened as I skimmed through the words printed in sharp black ink. Restraining order. Filed by Elizabeth Bennet. The accusation? Harassment and blackmail. I clenched my jaw, gripping the pages as I forced myself to read every word. "She's painting me as the villain," I said, my voice tight. "She's not just painting you as the villain," Elliot corrected. "She's setting you up for a public takedown." Jonathan let out a sharp breath beside me. I glanced at him, expecting the usual anger, but there was something else in his expression. Calculation. "We don't play defense," he said after a moment. "We go after her first." Elliot raised a brow. "Meaning?" Jonathan straightened. "We countersue. Damages, defamation, obstruction of justice. We use the financial fraud evidence and flip the narrative before she has a chance to weaponize this against Savannah." I felt my pulse quicken. If we did this, if we escalated, there would be no turning back. I thought about everything Elizabeth had done to me. The years of being overlooked, dismissed, discarded. The way she erased my father from my life. The way she tried to erase me. I met Jonathan's gaze. "Do it." Elliot nodded. "I'll get the paperwork started." Jonathan reached across the desk and squeezed my shoulder. "She thinks she's untouchable, Savannah, but even Elizabeth Bennet has weaknesses." I exhaled slowly, trying to ground myself. This wasn't just about winning. It was about making sure she never had the power to do this to anyone again. Meanwhile, at the Bennet estate, Scarlett paced her bedroom, heart pounding. She had spent years trusting Elizabeth, believing in the perfectly curated image her mother had crafted. But cracks were forming, too many to ignore. She needed answers. The house was eerily quiet as she slipped into Elizabeth's office. She hesitated, eyes darting around the dimly lit space. Then, her gaze landed on the large wooden desk. She stepped forward, running her hands along the surface before tugging at a drawer. Locked. Scarlett's fingers curled into fists. Elizabeth never locked her desk. A sick feeling crept into her stomach. Scarlett glanced over her shoulder before moving to a cabinet in the corner. Her mother kept spare keys there. She reached inside, her fingers brushing against metal. Got it. She hurried back to the desk, inserting the key into the lock. A soft click echoed in the silence. The drawer slid open, Stacks of documents filled the space, neatly arranged. Scarlett flipped through them, her breath catching when she spotted something old. An envelope, yellowed with time. She picked it up, turning it over. Jonathan Carter. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the letter inside. Elizabeth, I deserve to know. You can't keep this from me. Please, I just want to see my child. Scarlett's heart slammed against her ribs. She flipped to the back of the letter. A date. 18 years ago. Her stomach twisted violently. Jonathan Carter had known. He had tried. But Elizabeth never let him. Scarlett's throat went dry. This wasn't just about business. This wasn't just about fraud. Elizabeth hadn't just manipulated Savannah. She had stolen her father. Scarlett's hands tightened around the letter. For the first time in her life, she saw Elizabeth for exactly who she was. A liar, a thief, a woman who had taken everything from Savannah, and from her. Scarlett sucked in a sharp breath. She needed to talk to Savvy. But was it already too late? Elizabeth sat alone in her office, the dim glow of her desk lamp casting shadows along the polished wood. A glass of wine rested in her hand, swirling lazily as she stared at the blank wall in front of her. She already knew. Scarlett had found the letter. It was only a matter of time now. She took a slow sip of wine, her mind racing through the possible outcomes. Scarlett had always been obedient, predictable, but tonight would determine if that still held true. Scarlett's fingers clenched around the worn envelope as she sat in her car outside Savannah's apartment. The weight of the letter was unbearable, like a lead anchor pulling her down. For the first time in her life, she wasn't sure where she stood. Her whole world had been built on the foundation of her mother's word. Elizabeth always knew best, always had a plan. But this letter proved something else entirely. She inhaled sharply, opening her car door and stepping into the crisp night air. Each step toward Savannah's door felt heavier than the last. She knocked. The door swung open moments later, revealing Savannah in a loose sweater, her expression shifting instantly from confusion to wariness. "Did Elizabeth send you?" Scarlett hesitated. "No?" Savannah's gaze flickered to the envelope in Scarlett's hands. "Then why are you here?" Scarlett held out the letter, her voice barely above a whisper. "You need to read this." Savannah sat on the couch, her hands gripping the edges of the paper as her eyes skimmed over the words. Jonathan Carter's words. "Elizabeth, I deserve to know. You can't keep this from me. Please, I just want to see my child." Her breath hitched as she turned the page, scanning the date. He had written this 18 years ago. Her fingers tightened around the fragile edges. The ink may have faded, but the truth burned fresh. Her mother had known. She had known all along that Jonathan wanted her. Elizabeth hadn't just erased him from Savannah's life. She had stolen him. Savannah's throat tightened, a bitter taste rising in the back of her mouth. "She knew," she whispered, her voice trembling. "She knew he wanted me." Scarlett sat stiffly across from her, hands clenched in her lap. Her usual polished appearance was slightly disheveled, her blonde waves messier than usual, her lipstick slightly smudged. Savannah looked up, her eyes burning with something raw and furious. "You knew about this?" Scarlett flinched. "No." Savannah exhaled sharply, studying her sister, waiting for an explanation. Scarlett stared at the floor, her face conflicted. "I don't know who to believe anymore," she admitted, her voice unsteady. Savannah's pulse pounded in her ears. "Believe the facts, Scarlett." Scarlett swallowed, her brows furrowing. For once, she didn't immediately defend Elizabeth. Savannah's heart pounded. Was she getting through to her? At the Bennett estate, Elizabeth was already making her next move. She sat across from Robert Hale, her fingers tapping rhythmically against the edge of her desk. "She has the documents," she said flatly. Hale nodded. "The lawsuit was a start, but it won't be enough. She's too confident." Elizabeth's lips curled into a slow, cold smile. Then we take it further. Hale leaned in, waiting for instructions. Elizabeth picked up a folder, sliding it across the desk. She thinks she can win in court? She murmured. Fine, but by the time I'm done, she won't just lose the case. She'll be ruined. Hale flipped open the folder. Inside were falsified financial records, carefully crafted to paint Savannah as an unstable and reckless liability. Fabricating evidence is a dangerous game, he warned. Elizabeth merely smirked. Not if you play it well. Back at Savannah's apartment, the air was thick with unspoken words. Savannah stared at her sister, waiting for something, an admission, an apology, a reaction. Scarlett's phone buzzed. She glanced down, and her face paled. Savannah frowned. What is it? Scarlett hesitated, then turned the screen toward her. It was a message from Elizabeth. Come home. We need to talk. Savannah's stomach twisted. Scarlett's expression was unreadable. What are you going to do? Savannah asked cautiously. Scarlett exhaled, gripping the letter in her lap. I don't know. Savannah's chest tightened as she watched her sister stand, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. Scarlett turned toward the door, hesitating for a brief second before walking out. Savannah sat motionless, dread curling around her like a vice. Had she just gained an ally, or was Scarlett about to betray her? Scarlett stepped into her mother's office, the air thick with tension. Elizabeth sat behind her mahogany desk, an untouched glass of red wine beside her. She didn't look up right away. Instead, she continued scrolling through her phone, her fingers moving with a slow, deliberate rhythm. Finally, she set the phone down, clasped her hands together, and smiled. I assume you've thought things through. Scarlett's heart pounded. She had spent the night staring at the letter from Jonathan Carter, replaying every moment of her childhood under Elizabeth's rule. Every lie, every manipulation, every time she had been told to look the other way. For the first time in her life, she had seen her mother for what she truly was, and she knew what she had to do. Scarlett lifted her chin. Yes. Elizabeth smiled wider. Good. Then you know where you belong. Scarlett exhaled slowly. Yes, I do. And for the first time, it wasn't by Elizabeth's side. The morning of the trial, Charleston Superior Court buzzed with activity. Cameras flashed as Savannah stepped through the heavy wooden doors, her head held high. Jonathan walked beside her, his expression unreadable, while Elliot Grayson flipped through a stack of legal documents, preparing for the biggest fight of Savannah's life. Across the hall, Elizabeth entered with Robert Hale. She was dressed impeccably, her tailored suit unblemished, her demeanor as cool and controlled as ever. But there was something beneath the surface, an edge of tension in her shoulders, the slightest flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She knew she was losing control. Savannah met her gaze across the courtroom. Elizabeth smiled. Savannah clenched her fists. The war wasn't over yet. The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the back, their notebooks and recorders ready. The judge entered, a gavel rapping sharply against the wood as silence fell over the room. Elizabeth's lawyers went first. Hale rose, his voice smooth and practiced. Your Honor, this case is nothing more than a desperate attempt by Savannah Bennett to tarnish her mother's reputation. She has a history of erratic behavior, and she is lashing out in retaliation for imagined slights. Savannah tensed as he continued. She was always jealous of her sister, always difficult. Now she's seeking to dismantle the very family that supported her. The words cut, but she didn't flinch. Then, Hale dropped the bombshell. We have submitted evidence to support these claims. Financial transactions showing reckless spending, reports from family doctors noting her unstable emotional state, testimonies from former employees who witnessed her unpredictable outbursts. Savannah's stomach twisted. She knew Elizabeth would play dirty, but this was worse than she had imagined. They weren't just discrediting her. They were trying to erase her. She gripped the edge of the table. Not this time. Elliot stood next. Your Honor, my client is not the one with a history of deception. He slid a thick file across the table to the judge. These are the real financial records of Elizabeth Bennet. The documents prove that for years, she is engaged in fraudulent transactions, moving money into offshore accounts to avoid scrutiny. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Elliot continued, his voice unwavering. This isn't about family. This is about corruption. Elizabeth Bennet has spent her life silencing those who could expose her. But today, the truth comes out. The judge flipped through the pages. Elizabeth's expression remained calm, but her fingers curled tightly around the armrest of her chair. And then the doors at the back of the courtroom opened. Everyone turned as Scarlett walked in. Elizabeth's mask finally cracked. Savannah held her breath as her sister moved to the witness stand. Scarlett's heels clicked against the polished floor as she took her seat, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She met Elizabeth's gaze. And then she turned to the judge. My mother lied, Scarlett said, her voice clear and steady. She hid the truth about Savannah's father. She manipulated us all. A stunned silence filled the courtroom. Elizabeth's breath hitched, her carefully composed face shifting for the first time. Scarlett inhaled sharply, her fingers curling in her lap. I love my mother, she said quietly, but I can't defend her anymore. Savannah's throat tightened. Scarlett wasn't just exposing Elizabeth. She was choosing a side. The verdict was swift. The fraud documents sealed Elizabeth's fate. The court ruled in Savannah's favor. Elizabeth Bennet's assets were frozen. Her reputation was in ruins. Federal fraud charges loomed on the horizon. For the first time in her life, Elizabeth had lost. As the courtroom emptied, officers approached her. Elizabeth stood, smoothing the fabric of her blazer. She walked with slow, measured steps, her face unreadable. As she passed Savannah, she paused just long enough to whisper, This isn't over. Savannah exhaled. Yes, it is. Outside the courthouse, Savannah stood next to Scarlett. For the first time, they were on the same side. The sun was high overhead, casting light on the new world they had stepped into. Scarlett turned to her, her voice uncertain. So, what now? Savannah glanced toward the crowd of reporters, the weight of everything settling into her bones. Now? Now, she was free. The salty ocean breeze drifted in through the open windows of the cafe, carrying with it the rhythmic crashing of the waves against the shore. I sat at a small corner table, my hands wrapped around a warm cup of coffee, staring out at the endless horizon. The sky was soft with morning light, the kind of pale blue that stretched on forever. Across from me, Jonathan sat in silence, his fingers tapping idly against the rim of his own cup. He had aged well, but there was a weariness to him, lines on his face that I now recognized as the weight of a past neither of us had been allowed to share. He studied me, then leaned back in his chair. What now? I exhaled slowly, tracing the rim of my cup. I start over. Jonathan nodded, the corners of his mouth lifting in the smallest of smiles. Good answer. I gave a small, tired laugh. That's the thing about tearing everything down. Eventually, you have to figure out what comes next. The trial had ended 3 days ago. Elizabeth Bennet was no longer the untouchable matriarch of the Bennet Empire. Her fall from grace had been swift and merciless, with the news cycle devouring every last scandalous detail. The financial fraud, the manipulation, the way she had built an entire world on lies and control. Everything was out in the open now. And yet, despite it all, I didn't feel victorious. I felt empty. Jonathan seemed to understand. He took a slow sip of his coffee before setting it down. Fighting for the truth takes everything out of you. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, I let myself acknowledge what had been taken from both of us. 18 years. We could never get them back. But maybe we could start from here. The bell above the cafe door chimed. I turned to see Scarlett standing just inside, shifting uncomfortably on her heels. She looked different, not physically, but something in her demeanor had changed. The confidence she had always worn like armor seemed thinner now, less sure. She saw me, hesitated, then took a step forward. Jonathan glanced between us before pushing back his chair. "I'll give you two a minute." He left without another word, disappearing onto the sunlit sidewalk. Scarlett sat down across from me, her hands resting on the table. I could tell she was waiting for me to speak first. I didn't. For the first time in our lives, she was the one who had to reach across the silence. "I don't know how to fix what I've done," she said quietly, her voice uncertain. I sighed, stirring my coffee, watching the way the cream swirled into the dark liquid. "Neither do I admitted. "But maybe we start by not being strangers anymore." Scarlett's eyes flickered with something. Relief, maybe. Gratitude. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, I saw a future where she and I weren't just names in the same family. We could be more. Miles away, in a cold, sterile federal holding facility, Elizabeth Bennet sat alone. The room was small and bare, the walls an unforgiving shade of gray. The only sound was the ticking of the clock above the door. She stared at the table in front of her, expression unreadable, her fingers tracing the smooth surface. Her empire had crumbled. Her name was being dragged through the mud. And yet, she still sat with her chin high, her back straight. This was temporary. She would find a way out. She always did. The door opened, and Robert Hale stepped inside. His face was unreadable, but his tone left no room for interpretation. "It's over." Elizabeth didn't blink. "This family was mine." Hale shook his head. "Not anymore." She exhaled, long and slow, tilting her head as if she were considering her next move. Because, in her mind, there was always a next move. There always had to be. Back at the cafe, I stepped outside, letting the warmth of the sun settle against my skin. The world felt lighter. Not because everything was fixed, but because, for the first time in my life, the weight of who I was didn't belong to someone else. I had spent 18 years living in the shadows of my mother's decisions. Now, I was free. I took a deep breath, looking out at the city before me. For the first time, my future was my own. And that was everything. The key felt cool against my palm as I stood in front of my new apartment, the metal glinting softly under the afternoon sun. The building was modest but charming, with white-trimmed windows and a small balcony overlooking the quiet Charleston streets. A fresh start. I inhaled deeply, letting the thought settle into my bones. No more living in the shadows of the Bennet estate. No more unanswered questions about who I was or where I belonged. This was my space, my life, entirely my own. Turning the key in the lock, I stepped inside, the wooden floors creaking softly beneath my weight. The air smelled of fresh paint and the faintest hint of salt from the nearby harbor. Sunlight streamed in through the large windows, illuminating the boxes stacked neatly against the wall. My past, packed away, and my future, waiting to be written. I spent the next few hours unpacking, filling the empty space with pieces of myself. Books lined the shelves. A vase of fresh flowers sat on the kitchen counter. Then, in one of the last boxes, I found it. The stack of old documents I had brought with me. At the very top lay the letter, the one Jonathan Carter had written nearly 2 decades ago. The one Elizabeth had hidden away, sealing my fate before I ever had a chance. I traced the edges with my fingertips, a part of me still aching for the years we had lost. But we had time now. That was what mattered. I placed the letter carefully into a box labeled Past. Then, I picked up a blank notebook and flipped to the first page. In bold capital letters, I wrote one word at the top: Future. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. When I opened it, Scarlett stood there, holding 2 cups of coffee. She shifted awkwardly on her feet, looking almost uncertain. "I figured you could use one of these." I hesitated for only a second before stepping aside. "Come in." She moved slowly, taking in the space like she wasn't sure she belonged here. Neither of us spoke as she placed the coffee cups on the counter. The silence between us was heavy but not hostile, just unfamiliar. Finally, she exhaled. "So, are we just going to pretend that none of this ever happened?" I studied her face, searching for the answer I wasn't sure I had. "I don't know," I admitted, "but maybe we can try something new." Scarlett nodded, her expression softening. "I'd like that." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. Later that evening, I found an envelope on my kitchen table, tucked beneath a small stack of mail. Jonathan had left it for me before heading back home. Inside, there was a single sheet of paper, a deed. I blinked, rereading the words. A small plot of land near the coast. Mine. A note was attached. "Make this life your own." I ran my fingers over the words, something tightening in my chest. For so long, I had been fighting for a place in my own family. A place in the world that wasn't dictated by Elizabeth's rules or expectations. And now I had one. One I could build from the ground up. The night air was crisp as I made my way toward the ocean. The sand was cool beneath my bare feet, the tide rolling in and out in a steady, endless rhythm. For the first time, I let myself feel it. The weight of everything I had lost, and the freedom of everything I had gained. I wasn't a Bennett anymore. I wasn't someone's mistake, someone's secret. I was just Savannah. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. I turned toward the horizon, the last traces of sunlight slipping beneath the waves. The end of one story, the beginning of another. For so long, I let others define my worth. I let their expectations shape my future, their voices drown out my own. But not anymore. I am not just someone's secret, someone's mistake. I am my own story. And my story is just beginning. We all have the power to rewrite our lives, to break free from the past, and step into the future on our own terms. Strength isn't about never falling. It's about rising again and again until we stand firm in who we are. If this journey resonated with you, if you believe in reclaiming your own voice, your own worth, then join me. Subscribe, and let's move forward together.